The second wife's secret. The rain fell in relentless sheets, blurring the world outside the chapel windows into a gray haze. Clara stood at the entrance, her hands clasped tightly around a damp umbrella, her face a mask of composed grief. She wore a navy dress, simple but elegant, chosen because it was Richard's favorite. For 42 years, she had been his anchor, his homemaker, the woman who ironed his shirts and planned his dinners, who raised their son, Ethan, and kept their small coastal town home warm and orderly. Richard had been a respected architect, a man who built dreams into reality with his blueprints and charisma. Now he was gone, taken by a sudden heart attack at 65, and Clara was left to orchestrate his farewell. The chapel smelled of polished wood and lilies, the air heavy with the weight of mourning. Guests trickled in, their faces a mix of sympathy and curiosity. Clara greeted each one with a nod and a murmured, "Thank you for coming," her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. She had always been good at this, holding things together, maintaining appearances. Richard had loved that about her, or so she thought. "You're my rock, Clara," he'd say, his hand resting briefly on hers before he'd turn back to his sketches. She had believed him, had built her life around those words, sacrificing her own dreams of becoming a librarian to tend to his world. Ethan, their only child, stood at the podium, his 34-year-old frame sharp in a tailored black suit. He was a software developer now, living in Portland, but he'd come home to Seacrest, Maine, for this. His dark hair was neatly combed, his hazel eyes, Richard's eyes, fixed on the crowd. Clara sat in the second row, her hands folded in her lap, her heart swelling with pride as Ethan began his eulogy. He spoke of his father's brilliance, his dedication to his work, his ability to make everyone feel seen. The room was silent, hanging on his words. Clara waited, expecting the moment when he would turn to her, acknowledge the woman who had been the backbone of their family. But then Ethan's voice faltered, his eyes glistening. "There's someone I need to thank," he said, his words trembling in the quiet. "Someone who was the real support in Dad's life, especially in his final years. Vivian Carter." The name hit Clara like a cold wave. A murmur rippled through the crowd, and all eyes turned to the front row, where a woman in her early 40s stood, her auburn hair swept into an elegant updo, her emerald green dress hugging her frame. She dabbed at her eyes with a delicate handkerchief, her makeup flawless despite the tears. Clara's breath caught in her throat. Vivian Carter, Richard's assistant at his architecture firm for the past decade, promoted to project manager, always lingering at company events with a smile that seemed too perfect. Clara had met her countless times, had even invited her into their home for holiday parties, dismissing her as just another ambitious employee. Now, as Vivian nodded graciously and sat back down, Clara felt the world tilt. Vivian was there for Dad when he needed her most, Ethan continued, his voice steadying. She understood him, supported his vision. She was family. The word landed like a stone in Clara's chest. Family. Not her, not the woman who had spent 4 decades building a life with Richard, who had nursed Ethan through fevers and driven him to soccer practice, who had sold her grandmother's sapphire pendant to cover his college tuition when Richard's firm hit a rough patch. Clara's hands tightened around her handbag, her knuckles white. She felt the eyes of the congregation shift, not to her, but past her, as if she were invisible. The rest of the service passed in a blur. Clara shook hands, accepted condolences, and smiled mechanically, her mind replaying Ethan's words. As the guests dispersed, she saw Ethan approach Vivian, his hand resting briefly on her shoulder. "Thank you for being here," he said softly, and Vivian's lips curved into a smile that seemed almost triumphant. Clara's heart thudded, a dull pain spreading through her. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but she held herself together, just as she always had. That evening, Clara sat alone in their seaside cottage, the silence oppressive. The living room smelled faintly of Richard's cologne, a scent that clung to the leather armchair where he used to read his architectural journals. She hadn't moved his things, his glasses still sat on the side table, his favorite wool scarf draped over the chair. The house felt like a museum of their life together, each object a relic of a marriage she had thought was solid, if not passionate. She poured herself a glass of Merlot, the bitter taste mirroring her thoughts. How had she missed this? How had Vivian become family while Clara was relegated to the sidelines? The next morning, the lawyer's office smelled of old books and coffee. Clara sat across from Mr. Hargrove, a stooped man with a slow, deliberate voice, as he read Richard's will. The room was small, the walls lined with legal texts, a single window letting in pale light. Pursuant to the last will and testament of Richard Thomas Bennett, signed 4 years ago, Hargrove began, the entirety of his estate, including the primary residence in Seacrest, the beachfront condo in Bar Harbor, and all personal accounts, shall be inherited by Ms. Vivian Carter. Clara's world stopped. The words echoed in her mind, each one a betrayal. She stared at Hargrove, waiting for him to correct himself, to say it was a mistake. But he continued, detailing smaller bequests to charities, nothing for her, nothing for Ethan. She turned to her son, seated beside her, his expression unreadable. "You knew," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he didn't meet her eyes. "Dad had his reasons," he said quietly. Vivian was there for him. She understood his work, his stress. You were always so focused on the house, Mom." The words cut deeper than the will itself. Clara stood, her legs unsteady, and walked out without another word. In the parking lot, the sea air was sharp, the gulls crying overhead. She leaned against her car, her breath coming in short gasps. 42 years of marriage, of sacrifice, of love, were what she thought was love, erased in a single document. And her son, her only child, had known. He had chosen Vivian's side. Back home, Clara wandered through the house, her fingers trailing over the furniture. In Richard's study, she found a locked drawer in his desk. She hadn't touched his things since his death, respecting his space even now. But something shifted in her, a spark of defiance. She found a letter opener and pried the drawer open. Inside was a leather-bound notebook, its pages filled with Richard's neat handwriting. It wasn't a journal, not exactly, but a record of transactions, dates, and notes. One entry caught her eye, Bar Harbor condo, transferred to VC, 2019. Another, consulting fees, $75,000, QC LLC, 2020. Clara's pulse quickened. QC LLC, she'd seen that name on old firm documents. It was a shell company, one Richard had used for consulting projects. And VC, Vivian Carter. Clara's hand shook as she closed the notebook. This wasn't just an affair. Richard had funneled money, their money, to Vivian for years, building a secret life while Clara kept their home running. She thought of the condo in Bar Harbor, the one they'd visited together, where she'd cooked breakfasts and watched the sunrise with Richard. Had it ever been theirs, or was it always meant for Vivian? She called Ellen, her old friend from the library where Clara used to volunteer. Ellen was a retired paralegal, sharp and no-nonsense, with a knack for digging up information. "I need your help," Clara said, her voice steady for the first time in days. "I think Richard was hiding something, money, properties, maybe more. And Vivian Carter was part of it." Ellen didn't hesitate. "Come over tomorrow. Bring everything you've got." The next day, Clara sat at Ellen's kitchen table, the notebook open between them. Ellen's house was a cozy clutter of books and knitting projects, a stark contrast to Clara's meticulously organized home. Ellen scanned the pages, her brow furrowed. "This looks like a paper trail," she said. "These transfers to QC LLC, they're too clean, too regular. No legitimate consulting firm operates like this." "And the condo? That's a red flag. We need to check property records." They drove to the county clerk's office, the air thick with the scent of damp leaves and salt. Clara felt a strange clarity, as if the fog of her grief was lifting, replaced by purpose. The clerk pulled the records for the Bar Harbor condo. It had been transferred to Vivian's name 5 years ago, during a period when Clara was recovering from pneumonia, when Richard had said he was too busy to visit her in the hospital. There were other properties too, a rental cottage in Camden, a small apartment in Portland, all under Vivian's name or QC LLC. Back at Ellen's, they cross-referenced the notebook with bank statements Clara had dug up from Richard's files. The pattern was clear: large sums moved from the firm's accounts to QC LLC, often just before audits. "This isn't just infidelity," Ellen said, her voice low. "This is fraud." Richard was siphoning money from his own company. Clara's stomach twisted. She thought of the years she'd balanced their budget, stretching every dollar to keep their life afloat. She'd sold her grandmother's pendant, a family heirloom, to cover Ethan's tuition when Richard's firm hit a downturn. And all along, he'd been building a fortune for Vivian. "What do I do?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You fight," Ellen said. "You take this to a lawyer. You expose her." Clara spent the next week gathering evidence. She found more in Richard's study: receipts, emails, even a photo of Vivian and Richard at the Bar Harbor condo, his arm around her, both of them smiling. The caption read, "Our little escape." The date was the same month Clara had been bedridden. She felt a surge of anger, not just at Richard, but at herself for being so blind. How had she missed this? How had she let her life shrink to fit his? She hired a lawyer, Rachel Cohen, a woman in her late 40s with a reputation for taking on tough cases. Rachel's office was in a sleek Portland high-rise, the walls lined with degrees and awards. She listened as Clara laid out the evidence, her expression calm but focused. "This is strong," Rachel said, flipping through the notebook. "We can file a lawsuit against Vivian for unjust enrichment and possibly fraud. If we can prove the transfers were illicit, we can reclaim the assets. But Clara, this will get messy. Are you ready for that?" Clara thought of Ethan, of his words at the funeral, of Vivian's smug smile. "I'm ready," she said. The lawsuit took months to prepare. Clara spent her days combing through records, meeting with Rachel, and learning the legal intricacies of corporate fraud. She felt like a student again, her mind sharp and alive in a way it hadn't been in years. At night, she sat in the cottage, the ocean's roar a constant companion, and wondered about Ethan. He hadn't called since the will reading, hadn't answered her texts. She wanted to believe he was just grieving, but his silence felt like another betrayal. One evening, Clara found a small box in Richard's closet, tucked behind a stack of old blueprints. Inside was a diary, its cover worn, the pages filled with Vivian's handwriting. Clara hesitated, then opened it. The entries began 10 years ago, detailing meetings with Richard, dinners, trips. "He says I'm his muse," one entry read. "He's tired of her, of the routine. He wants a new life." Another entry, dated 3 years ago, "I told him to rewrite the will. He hesitated, but I know he'll do it. He always does what I want." Clara's hands trembled as she read. The diary wasn't just a record of an affair, it was a blueprint of manipulation. Vivian had planned every step, from winning Richard's affection to securing his wealth. One entry chilled her to the core: "Ethan's coming around. He thinks I'm good for his dad. Soon, he'll see me as family." Clara closed the diary, her resolve hardening. Vivian hadn't just taken Richard, she'd tried to take Ethan too. The trial began on a crisp spring morning, the courtroom packed with reporters and curious locals. Seacrest was a small town, and Richard's firm had been its economic backbone. The scandal was the talk of every diner and bar. Vivian sat across the room, her face composed, her lawyer arguing that the transfers were legitimate payments for her work. But Rachel was relentless, presenting the notebook, the property records, and the diary. Clara took the stand, her voice steady as she recounted her marriage, her sacrifices, the moment she realized she'd been erased from her own life. "Mrs. Bennett," Rachel asked, "what did you feel when you learned your husband left everything to Ms. Carter?" Clara looked at Vivian, then at Ethan, who sat in the back, his face unreadable. "I felt like I'd been written out of my own story," she said. 42 years of love, of work, of building a family, and it was given to someone else. But I'm here to take it back." The judge, a stern woman with gray hair, ruled in Clara's favor. The transfers were deemed fraudulent, the properties ordered sold, and the funds returned to Richard's estate, to be redistributed to Clara. Vivian's face crumpled as the gavel fell. She left the courtroom without a word, her heels clicking on the marble floor. Clara expected relief, but the victory felt hollow. Ethan hadn't spoken to her during the trial, hadn't reached out. She drove home, the ocean stretching endlessly to her right, and wondered if she'd lost him for good. That night, she sat on the porch, the diary in her lap. She opened it to the last page, where Vivian had written, "He loved me because I made him feel alive." She never could. Clara tore the page out and burned it in the fire pit, watching the flames consume the lies. Months passed. Clara sold the Bar Harbor condo and used the money to buy a small bookstore in town, a dream she'd buried long ago. She spent her days surrounded by books, their pages a comfort, a reminder that stories could be rewritten. She joined a local book club, made new friends, and started writing a memoir about her journey. The cottage felt like hers again, not a shrine to Richard's memory. One evening, as she was closing the bookstore, Ethan appeared at the door. He looked older, his eyes tired. "Can we talk?" he asked. They walked to the pier, the sea calm under a fading sunset. "I was wrong," he said, his voice breaking. "I thought Vivian was what Dad needed. I didn't see how she manipulated him, how she hurt you." "I'm sorry, Mom." Clara's throat tightened. She thought of the boy who used to cling to her during thunderstorms, the teenager who'd confided in her about his first love. "I never stopped loving you," she said. "But I had to fight for myself. I hope you understand that." He nodded, tears in his eyes. "I do. And I'm proud of you." They hugged, the ocean whispering around them. Clara felt a weight lift, not just from the trial, but from years of carrying a life that wasn't fully.
Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, it really helps. Watch the full video for more details.